Latin America is home to the richest man on earth and the world's 10th and 14th largest economies, Brazil and Mexico. Yet it is also considered to be the world's most unequal region. Even in countries where poverty is falling and indicators for children are improving, millions of children, often those belonging to marginalised groups, are still living in extreme poverty, and their rights are not being achieved. I'm joined by Andres Franco, UNICEF's regional manager for Latin America and the Caribbean. He's here to talk about how UNICEF is working to ensure that every single child's rights are fulfilled in a region where extreme wealth and poverty sit alongside one another, where mountains and rainforests create a physical barrier between UNICEF staff and isolated communities, and where natural disasters such as hurricanes can reverse progress for children. Many countries in the region have made very promising progress for children in recent years. Could you talk a little about the children hidden behind these improving national averages?
Yes, when we talk about children in Latin America and the Caribbean, it's very important to go beyond national averages into the situation of children at the subnational level. Many of the government donors in Europe, the US, Japan, and other donors tend to concentrate their aid efforts in the poorest countries of Latin America, and thinking that that will also give them access to the poorest children of Latin America. And those would be those in Bolivia and Nicaragua, which are the poorest countries of the region. But by doing so, they miss close to 92% of the poorest children of the region, which are not in these two countries, but in other countries. They're in Brazil, they're in Mexico, they're in Colombia, they're in Peru. That's where the poor children of Latin America are, or where most of them are. So UNICEF has a specific ambition to reach out to these children, including those that are particularly excluded. There is a large coincidence between the poorest children and those that belong to ethnic groups, such as indigenous children, Afro-descendant children, and also children with any disability. Those are three groups that are most vulnerable and less visible. Many government policies, a lot of the work of local NGOs tends to be on children living in urban areas or children living in rural areas that are easily accessible. I think the role of UNICEF is to reach the unreachable children, to go to the one that is furthest and to make sure that the rights of those children are also alive and protected and promoted.
Could you tell me a little more about the barriers UNICEF staff must negotiate in order to reach children?
Well, in the case of these children, you have, of course, cultural contexts that are non-Western. So whatever UNICEF does with these communities has to be adapted culturally to be effective. To give you an example, in the Andes, many of the women, when they're giving birth, one of the reasons why they don't like to be assisted by health personnel is because they don't like to be naked. So they rather stay at home and perhaps die at home simply because culturally it is not okay for them to be naked. Many of them give birth standing up, and that will allow them to keep their clothes on. This simple detail, which has implied that UNICEF needs to adapt culturally the kind of intervention that it promotes, makes a difference in the life of many mothers. UNICEF needs to adapt to the distances. In the Amazon in particular, the distances are long. The cost of moving in rivers is very high. Gasoline is extremely expensive to move around. And it's simply difficult to reach out. So there are many challenges in terms of being able to allow UNICEF to be a real catalyzer of action, to allow UNICEF to be a real supporter of the very weak government authorities that you find there. Very humble people who are living in very difficult conditions, trying to make a difference with any know-how. Some of these majors, many of these majors or health officers that maybe haven't even finished primary school, they're there. So these are the people we need to work with.
Here in the UK, we've recently been raising money for children affected by hurricanes and tropical storms in Haiti. Could you tell me a little more about the impact that natural disasters such as these have on children and their development?
I think we're in front of an example of the kind of impact that climate change has on children. I think there's general consensus that the increase in the number of hurricanes, or even the amount of rain that is falling in Colombia and Central America, is beyond normal standards, and it just alters completely the mode of life of very poor families. And this has a devastating effect on children. They can't go to school, they can't go to health centers, their families are divided, they're poorer. The role of UNICEF is to make sure that we can create again the environment for these children, to make sure that these families can flourish and can actually provide the appropriate context for these children to have a life and to enjoy their rights. Big challenge and a very complicated one, because one hurricane passes and when we're just beginning to do the work, the next one comes in.
We've spoken a little about the impacts climate change could have on children. What other developments are you concerned about?
We're very concerned about climate change. I think we already have concrete manifestations of that, not only because of the number of natural disasters, mainly rain, drought, and hurricanes. We also have high levels of contamination in many urban areas with respiratory diseases for children. And we're watching very closely the impact that the economic slowdown may have on children. We fear that governments may cut some of their spending, and that they will not give priority to social issues. If it comes to picking, guns or butter, and I think probably the guns will win. One of the things that we're trying to learn is to engage with small enterprises and micro enterprises. I think that's where the impact will be, and that's obviously in rural areas or in very poor areas. How much UNICEF can do there, I think we're going to have to work with many partners. We know that after these economic crises, the social indicators for children do get worse. Children tend to drop school, budgets seem to go away. Basically, it has a direct impact on their rights.
UNICEF has 24 country offices in Latin America and the Caribbean. Projects supported by UNICEF UK in the last couple of years include basic education in Brazil, emergency relief for children in Haiti, Jamaica and Peru, and child protection in Bolivia and Ecuador. To find out more about projects supported by UNICEF UK around the world, see the Where We Work section of the UNICEF UK website. This is Mary Whittaker for UNICEF UK.